Hello, friends, strangers, people of the internet. It is, what day of the week is it? Is it Tuesday? Is it Wednesday? I don't even know anymore, to be honest with you. And I don't think it really matters. I mean, who cares? You know, weekends are bleeding into weekdays. I am actually very excited to sit down tonight and talk about a story that just broke. Kind of builds off some of the conversations I was having previously about Parler and their security, or lack of security, I should say. So I'm just going to kind of dive into the article that Wired wrote on the Gab leak. We're going to touch a little bit on what is Gab, some basic cryptographic concepts, talking about SQL, and then delving into a couple of little side topics here and there. So if anyone is hanging out in the chat, has any questions, by all means, I'm always looking to hear from you. And we are going to just start diving in. So the far-right platform Gab has been hacked, including its private data. So there was a group called DDoS Secrets, Denial of Service Secrets, that got about a 70 gigabyte dump from their SQL server of passwords, private posts, and everything else. I'm going to skip through the first article. So on Sunday night, the WikiLeaks style group Distribute Denial of Secrets is revealing what it calls Gab leaks, a collection of more than 70 gigabytes of data representing more than 40 million posts. DDoS Secrets says a hacktivist who self-identifies as Jack Sparrow and My Little Anonymous Revival Project siphoned that data out of Gab's backend databases in an effort to expose the platform large right-wing users. So I think last time I talked a little bit about Parler, we talked about how they had terrible essentially just really, really bad infrastructure that allowed anyone to query their API without any kind of authentication. This is basically just as egregious in terms of its level of incompetency. I don't have the specific details on the nature of the SQL attack that they used, but most SQL attacks are very similar. It's kind of like having a door lock so unsophisticated that someone could open your front door with a credit card, like just by jostling it. Okay, so those Gab patrons whose numbers have swelled after Parler went offline included large numbers of QAnon conspiracy theorists, white nationalists, and promoters of former President Donald Trump's election-stealing conspiracies that resulted in the January 6th riot on Capitol Hill. So yada yada. Okay, so this part I want to get into. So, but also private group and private individual account posts and messages, as well as user passwords and group passwords. Contains pretty much everything on Gab, including user data and private posts. Everything someone needs to run nearly complete analysis on Gab's users and content. The password thing, which we're going to get to in a minute, is particularly egregious and particularly terrifying. Because some of the stuff obviously was still, like, the group passwords were not encrypted. Unfortunately, the user passwords were, but we're going to touch on why, if you have the password hashes, why you might already be fucked. So it's another gold mine of research for people looking at militias, neo-Nazis, far-right QAnon, and everything surrounding January 6th. So one of the things that's interesting about this is they're not publicly releasing the data due to its sensitivity and the vast amounts of private information that it contains. Instead, it says they will selectively share this with journalists, social scientists, and researchers. Wired viewed a sample of the data and appears to contain Gab users' individual and group profiles and their descriptions and privacy settings. Passwords for private groups were unencrypted, which Torba, that's the CEO of Gab, says the platform discloses to users when they create one. Individual user account passwords appear to be cryptographically hashed, a safeguard that may prevent from them being compromised, but the level of security depends on the hashing scheme used and the strength of the underlying password. So I want to touch on this really quickly because there's a very interesting graph that I found that kind of explains what a cryptographic hash is. The concept behind a hash is to take some type of data input, in this case text, to apply what they call a function, which is just a one-way equation. And that spits out essentially a hexadecimal alphanumeric code. Okay. Now you can essentially use these to validate data. They're essentially small, like distillations or digests of the actual input. But what's interesting is that if you look at a password hash, for example, and you see that, 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, blah, you can actually start to pick out patterns in these and compare hashes. So for example, let's say Donald Trump was stupid enough to use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we knew what the hash algorithm that they were using for their password hashing was. We would only need to sort of look through like their entire list and just find like, oh shit, we found this hash meets Donald Trump's password. We know that hash is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Therefore, Donald Trump's password is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's a pretty, like, it's terrifying. It's terrifying they got their hands on the hash passwords. Among the users whose hash passwords appear to be included in the data were those of Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, MyPillow CEO, and election conspiracy theorist Mike Lindell, and disinformation spouting radio host Alex Jones. The hack data also includes, the chat logs file that appears to contain private conversations between the site's users. So that's also crazy. So it's not like, so one thing to keep in mind is that when the Parler hack happened, or the Parler leak, they were querying an API that did not require authentication. So it's like they didn't even have a front door on the place. It's hard to argue you can't walk into a building when there's no front door. So this is a little bit different. These guys actually went and got private data. This wasn't just stuff that was publicly available. Even with the unencrypted API, they still couldn't steal things like passwords, private messages, chat logs, stuff like that. This is a much, much deeper hack, which makes it far more interesting. And I'm very curious to see what some of the analysis that comes out of this is. There's a couple tweets related to that we're going to get to in a little bit. But anyway. So, according to DDoS Secrets Best, the hacker says that they pulled out Gab's data via SQL injection, a vulnerability in the site, which is a common web bug in which a text field on a site doesn't differentiate between a user's input and commands, and it's the site's code, allowing a hacker to reach in and meddle with the backend SQL database. Despite the hacker's reference to Anonymous Rival Project, they're not associated with the loose hacker collective Anonymous. They told Best, but do you want to represent the names of struggling masses against the capitalists and the fascists? I fucking love this shit. This is great. Anyway, so this is them responding to Wired's mention of the SQL injection from Gab themselves. They did actually respond and say yes. Torba said initial statement, we were aware of the vulnerability in this area. We patched it last week. We're also proceeding to undertake a full security audit. The post went on to state that Gab doesn't collect personally identifiable information from its users, such as telephone numbers, social security numbers, birth dates, or health and financial information. So I think the reason why they're trying to differentiate themselves here from the Parler leak is that the Parler users, they actually did provide things like driver's licenses, social security numbers. All that stuff was provided in order for them to get the verified status. So that seems to maybe be something that we didn't get our hands on with this leak. So DMs only went live for a few weeks and are not currently feature support of the site, blah, 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 blah. Torb did not confirm the security breach had occurred in his Friday statement, but in a follow-up on Sunday, he used a transphobic slur to insult the hackers attacking the site and added that both his and Donald Trump's account had been compromised. I don't think that there's a whole lot more that I want to get into specifically in this article, because it's just more about, kind of the Parler and some of the parallels between them, which I sort of just alluded to. But anyway, so point being is, for whatever reason, these guys are fucking idiots. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, why I think that is, or at least what my opinion is, and why cybersecurity and operational security seems to be such an absolute fucking joke, weak sauce in the right-wing community. Are they a community? Anyway. So we touched a little bit on how cryptographic hashes work. I'm not going to bore you guys with rainbow tables right now, but this, so before we get to the technical stuff, let's actually take a look at the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about here. So this is Gab. This is the site. If you guys haven't been on it, fucking good for you. 'Cause it's bullshit. It's awful. It's just people talking a lot of shit, and you can imagine basically what each hot take on this is. So, no one falls and hits her eye. Maybe someone socked this motherfucking traitor and he's just too embarrassed to admit it. This is what I mean about the conspiracy theory stuff. Bitching about kids wearing masks. where it says no evidence Antifa left wing. Oh, this is this is when they're saying, yeah, like Antifa wasn't there, it was your guys. Let's click on some of these comments. Shit, I have to sign up to view. Maybe we should sign up. I don't know, chat. If we get if people want to see me sign up for Gab and dive into comments and stuff, please let me know, and we'll start getting really deep into the rabbit hole here. Anyway, a cursory examination of the content on Gab's site will lead you to believe that it is a cesspool of fuckery and assholes and right-wing conspiracy theorists and delusions. Again, they're complaining about drag queens reading stories to kids. This actually looks like this picture legitimately looks photoshopped. I don't think this is real. Also, it looks like it could be a meme. Donald Trump is using this site to propagate some of his messages, his endorsements of like Tim Scott. Again, anti-trans, anti-mask, anti-vax, just basically hate. Like the whole website is a really, really, really nice cesspool of hate and vitriol. So I don't think we need to spend a ton more time right now getting into the actual content on Gab, but if people do at some point want to actually do a deep dive and see what that looks like, yeah, I guess we could get weird. Why not, right? So one of the things that I think was fascinating about this is that they were owned by a SQL attack, which I've honestly, guys, been thinking all day about a way of articulating this in a way that, like an analogy that would make sense. It is really, really difficult to explain, though, just how like asinine this is. This would be like securing the front door of your house with like a zip tie. Like it doesn't make like, it's like, you don't do that. Like that's amateur hour. Like, why are you why are you keeping your door shut and locked with a zip tie? So we're going to talk a little bit very briefly about what SQL is, why it is vulnerable to attacks, why it only noobs don't patch their shit. And a little bit more context on the specifics of this hack, the information that we got from it, etc., etc. So SQL is simply structured query language. It is a way of being able to query a database. And a lot of people ask me at work, when we're talking about what databases are, Excel is essentially a database. You have rows, you have columns, you fill in data, right? And then this entire thing is referred to as a table. When we talk about databases, though, we're typically talking about more complicated relationships between tables, things like one-to-one, one-to-many. You have all kinds of interesting depth, and that's where you actually get into a program like Microsoft Access. If you took computer school, when I'm a little old, and I don't know if a lot of my viewers actually spent time watching spending time in Microsoft Access in computer class, but is essentially building more complex repositories of information. That's what a database is. It's a collection of tables in order for you to store things like customer records, user IDs, yada, yada, yada. So SQL is a language that allows you to query databases, and it has a particular structure to it, which obviously makes it easy for it to malleate. One of the big advantages to SQL is that it not only allowed you to query multiple things at once, it allowed you to query certain aspects without specifying the how to do it, which was kind of cool for computing. So one of the things that SQL was originally vulnerable to in its first iterations were things called SQL injections. I'm going to show you guys a video very briefly here of what a SQL injection actually looks like. But the concept of a SQL injection, the best analogy that I could come up with today was, so imagine that you wanted to get into a particular bar or restaurant, okay? And there was a bouncer there. The bouncer needs your username and your password to get in. This is similar to you logging into any site on the internet. So you walk up to the bouncer, you say, "Hey, my name's Mark. My password is 1234." The bouncer knows that I'm Mark and knows that my password is 1234 because he has it written down on a piece of paper or it's in his noggin. And so he's like, "Cool, Mark, come on in." A SQL injection attack would be the equivalent of essentially walking up to the bouncer and saying a phrase to him that basically said, "Hey, what is the administrator account name? Like who's the boss of this place? He'd say, Jimmy's the boss. And he's like, cool, I'm Jimmy. And he just would say, oh, hey, Jimmy, come on in. I know it's kind of abstract and weird, but that's essentially the vector of how a SQL injection gets into a database and elevates information out of it. It structures, again, because it's a structured query language, it structures the nature of its query to trick the database into something. And there's all kinds of different things you can trick it into, like tricking into thinking who you are, tricking it to allow you to take records out of the building, all kinds of stuff. So SQL injections are essentially a way of injecting a particular query to get something out of the database that it's not really meant for, okay? Or you're not really meant to get, I should say. I'm going to show you a quick video, an example of a SQL injection that might help contextualize this a little bit. Hopefully this works.
Consider an application that lets users log in with a username and password. If a user submits the username Wiener and the password Blue Cheese, the application checks the credentials by performing this SQL query. If the query returns the details of a user, then the login is successful. If not, then the login is rejected. In this situation, an attacker can log in as any user without a password simply by using the SQL comment sequence to remove the password check from the where clause of the query. If the attacker submits the username administrator quote dash dash, then the application performs this SQL query. This query returns the user whose username is administrator and successfully logs the attacker in as that user.
Simple, okay? So by manipulating the way the language works, you're able to force certain things out of it, whether it's passwords, whether it's, like I said, backend databases, stuff like that. So really quickly want to touch on, oh, where is it here? There's a great Gab leaks. So this is posted by DDoS Secrets. They are making the data set only available on limited distribution. So unfortunately, right now, as we know, it's not available to the public. Whether or not it's going to be leaked, we'll see. But essentially, while the data set is extremely important to understanding recent current events, as well as being a valuable historical archive, it also represents privacy concerns. Due to these concerns, along with the presence of passwords and other personal information, this data set is only being offered to journalists and researchers. So any journalists out there who think they can help me get their hands on this, I want to talk to you. There's about 70 gigabytes of Gab public posts, private posts, user profiles, hash passwords for users, direct messages, plain text passwords for groups, SQL format, along with over 70,000 messages and more than 19,000 chats with 15,000 users in plain text format. That's a lot of stuff just exposed that you're going to be able to query very quickly. I'm not going to get into the false accusations stuff. Apparently, Gab basically said, hey, they tried to ransom us for this. These guys said it's bullshit. I really honestly don't know who to believe in that regard, to be honest with you, so we'll see how that ends up turning out. There's a journalist, though, that posted a fun tweet, which is at the top 20 biggest groups sorted by most members on Gab. And we're going to take a quick look at these here. This is what you'll be able to do if you actually get your hands on the data set. You'll be able to see things like the member count of particular groups like the Donald, Trump 2020, QAnon, We Love Trump, Conservative News, Stop the Steal, QAnon, Guns of Gab, Christianity, QAnon, Q Research, Survival. Man, Republicans and conservatives, they're real fucking like persecuted these days, eh? I feel like they're an endangered species and they're on the brink of being hunted to extinction and they gotta survive. They really gotta keep alive and survive, you know? Sorry guys, I'm getting a little rowdy here. Anyway, this whole like I said, it's gonna be really, really fun to see what some of the analysis of this data is. I think it just came out like last night, so it's gonna take a little bit of time before anyone actually starts digesting it and giving us any kind of insights into any of the craziness that's going on there. What really makes me like salivate is the idea that they have like Donald Trump's, again, like hashed passwords. Like if he So guys, this is why having like a complex password is so important, because even though your password might not get leaked, if they get the hash of your password, which is again like a reduced version of it, they can still figure it out, especially if it's based on plain text words. And one of the things that a lot of people think is like, oh, I'll use, letter substitutions. I'll use, I'll use a 0 instead of an O, or a 3 instead of an E. That shit doesn't work. Like, we've either been able to build very efficient machines to substitute those, or there's another thing called rainbow tables that essentially just, it does that for us. It tests all of those permutations of letter substitutions. It's like, I want you to try every password, and I want you to add 69 to the end of all of them too. Or I want you to do this and add, the person's dog's name. So what it really allows them to do is quickly leverage what you think is something that obfuscates them from getting your password. And it's like, nah, dog, we figured that out pretty quickly. So guys, if you want to have good passwords, have a passphrase, something super simple, 4 random words. Try not to use song lyrics, because again, we're getting to the point with computing where eventually we'll be able to actually digest entire like libraries of Congress and be able to use strings of text like that against passwords in dictionaries and stuff as computing gets more and more complex. So I always say obfuscate your password with some like really good, passphrasing, and you'll probably be not low-hanging fruit that these guys aren't going to get their hands on. Anyway, that's like really all I had to talk about today on the Gab leak. There's really, it's very, very early on, in development and what's going on, but I just really wanted to get my thoughts out there, have a little quick conversation with people, see what they thought about this. One thing that I'm super fascinated to see is the data analysis that's going to come out as a result of this. But more importantly, I think it's a cool conversation to start having with friends, because we rely on the services of internet providers and internet companies, and, we need to have some fundamental understanding of computing and technology and how these things work, right? So, anyway, I don't know. I'm going on a rant now, so I think I'm going to cut it off, because ranting is never good. But I expect to do a couple more episodes like this, talking about Gab, getting a little bit deeper into some of the analysis that comes out. So guys, for those of you who took the time coming to join, really appreciate it. It's always good to see everyone. Love you guys. Be well. Have an excellent night, and we'll talk soon.